yesterday mentioned, I got this dream in my mind. I want somebody to write 2 books, mostly because I want to read these 2 books. One, The Bakers of Rochester. The other is The Sauces of Rochester. They're interesting history in both those areas of families who either ran bakeries, most often folks from Italy, or who made sauces, spaghetti sauces. Anyway, one of those families, a gentleman from, joins us now, Mr. Paul Nicosia. How are you, sir?
Good, Bob. How are you?
I'm awfully well. It's an honor to speak with you.
Likewise.
Way back in the day, there was in Rochester a Nicosia sauce. Could you tell us about it, how it came to be and all?
Well, first of all, yesterday I happened to catch, I was in the truck just at the right time to hear you start to mention this. And just to set the genealogy straight, it was my dad that started the business. And Dean, my nephew, who you were talking with, it was actually his grandpa, not his great-grandpa.
Okie doke. Very good.
All right. Well, my dad used to work for Rochester Provision when I was a little boy. Rochester Provision was actually an arm of Wegmans, one of the companies that they owned, and he drove truck for them. And I think this is something that he had always had in the back of his mind, that he wanted to start this business. But one day, he finally just stepped out of the boat and decided that he's going to start this business. He came home, and I remember this very distinctly, told my mom he had a bag full of stuff. He says, we're going into the sauce business. My mom was just a little bit taken back by all of this. I think you could understand that. He had a family to support, and he was going to be quitting his job and doing it full time.
When was this, sir?
This was right around 1950. I'm clear on the exact dates, but that's pretty darn close, within a year or so.
Okay.
He started this business. We lived in the city in the 19th Ward on Thurston Road, and we lived in a typical 2.5-story city home. Old basements, not very large basements, 1/3 of them occupied by what they used to call the octopus, the big coal-burning furnaces, gravity heat. And my dad put a couple of boards across the deep sinks and set up a couple of big vats and started making sauce. And we had year-round heat, whether it was summer or winter. That house was like a sauna with my dad making the sauce. He wanted it to be a family business, so he invited a couple of his brothers, my Uncle Joe, my Uncle Steve, and they decided to join him from a financial standpoint. I don't ever recall them physically being involved in the actual making of the sauce, but there was a partnership there that ultimately was dissolved. No hard feelings. They never created a wedge between them. They just...
How did he sell it?
He went store to store. Back then, Bob, the neighborhood stores were big. For example, on Thurston Road, from Brooks Avenue to Ravenwood, which was about 6 or 7 blocks, there were about 6 mom-and-pop deli grocery stores, along with a Star Market, a Mohegan Market, and a Loblaws. And those were obviously the chain stores. Now, you mentioned yesterday that he had put it in Wegmans. Actually, he hadn't. The chain stores were not easy to penetrate, but he knew that going to the neighborhood stores, he could get started. I remember driving with him in his truck when he would make the stops. First, he'd be delivering some sauce to the stores that already were selling it. Then he would go to stores that hadn't yet bought it, and he would try to sell the sauce. And he was very successful at it because this sauce became very, very popular, and people started coming into these stores and asking for it. And it was his big feature right there.
And he made and bottled it in the basement of your house.
Correct.
What was the volume like? How much was he putting out?
Well, it's hard to say because, once again, it was simply the neighborhood stores. But maybe to make it clearer, he eventually had to move out of the house, so the volume was increasing. He still hadn't penetrated the chain stores yet. He found a little place on Silver Street and started bottling it there, and then he moved from there to Plymouth Avenue.
Was he supporting the family? And what did this grow into? How long did it last?
It lasted about 10 years, and I'll tell you what happened. He took on another partner. This was actually a working partner. He needed the help, and his partner had 14 children. Now, the problem being this, that with 14 children, it's tough enough with 1 or 2 children, but with 14 children, he always needed money. And his partners, if he needed to take money out of the business, my dad had to take it out as well. So the one thing that wasn't happening is that they weren't building a kitty to be able to expand the business.
Yeah.
And Wegmans finally knocked on the door and said, we are getting a demand for your sauce, and we would like you to diversify. They wanted him to make a meat sauce, sauce with peppers. Now, all of this required him to make an investment and expand the business. Didn't have the money to do it.
Didn't have the money to do so. So opportunity knocked, but he couldn't answer.
Exactly.
Now, did it just go out of business, or what was the fate of Nicosia sauce?
Right around 1960, once again, give or take a year, if anything, a year backwards, only because I was still in high school. I was a junior in high school, and my brother was serving in the Army, and he was stationed in France. And neither one of us were obviously in a position to be taking over the business or joining in the business. Now, we did help as boys.
Sure.
There used to be a place called, I can't think of the name of it now. It was they sold paste powder to make glue. The glue factory, Steckel. And what we did is we mixed all the paste, and with a paintbrush, we painted the back of the labels, put them on the jars, put excess off with a washcloth, and put them in the cases.
They've got machines that do that now.
We were the machine.
Yeah, back in the day.
We just were not in a position. I
understand. At that time, as Nicosia is we really can't go forward. We hear about the ragu and whatever like that. What was happening to? Were there other sauces in Rochester then that were locally made, sir? Do you know?
Right. Yes. At that time, there were three prominent sauces: ragu, Nicosia spaghetti sauce, and Johnny's spaghetti sauce. And all three were in the grocery stores. I'm not sure if any of them. I know my dad's never penetrated the chains, and I don't think that Johnny's did as well, and Ragu eventually did. But here's what happened. My dad was faced with a situation where he really couldn't go much further. If he couldn't expand, he was going to be, lagging in the race with the chain stores. He was approached by Ragu in the late 50s. And ultimately wound up selling the business to Ragu. Sadly, I think he gave the business to Ragu. That's a personal opinion. I know the number, and I know where from
was
there.
Ragu, and I'm ignorant, I'm just asking you, maybe you know, maybe you don't. Was Ragu at that point the Canasano family, or who was Ragu?
Canasano at that time.
Okay. They started it, husband and wife, back in the day, right?
Canasanos?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay.
It was Johnny's, Canasanos, and Nicosia. They were all family-owned businesses, small businesses. Canasano approached my dad, purchased the business, and left both sauces on the shelf, but ultimately phased out Nicosia's spaghetti. I think they changed the recipe a little bit. It was not the same sauce. I know it wasn't the same sauce. And eventually, I think it was a game plan, obviously, to bring their sauce to the forefront. Well, it wasn't that long after that they were bought out by Chesborough Ponds. Have you ever heard of that company?
Yeah, in years past.
Yeah, right.
Well, I pronounce it Cheeseborough, but I may not have it right. And that allowed Ragu to become a national company.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's what catapulted.
And Ragu, I think I'm not Italian. Ragu's the Italian word for sauce or something, isn't it? I mean,
sure.
yours was named after your family. Theirs was named after us. But Ragu, this Rochester product with this Nicosia infusion, it became, when the Canasano sold it, it became a national brand.
Correct.
Yeah.
It just exploded at that point.
Yeah. Well, interesting history. And then maybe this is not your family, but maybe you can help me out. Then Mr. Canasano, he had to, there was a non-compete for some number of years. And then he started another sauce company after that?
Yes, he did. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There was a non-compete, and I'm sure at least for 10 years, if not longer, I think that he did nothing and then ultimately came back into the market once he had satisfied that non-compete.
Mm-hmm. And then, help me do you know this? And again, forgive me, we're speaking with Paul Nicosia. His dad started and was Nicosia spaghetti sauces. You probably had those when you were young. But did the Canasano folks started? When did the Ledestri stuff start? What was the story on that?
That I'm not sure of, Bob. I can't give you an awful lot of information there. I really don't know. As a matter of fact, surprisingly, there was a segment on the news here a few weeks back featuring that company, and that was, I didn't even realize that they were in the Rochester area.
They're kind of big, but they're pretty quiet. I mean, they make a lot of brands for a lot of people. They make the Paul Newman, they make the Wegmans, but the list of everything they make, I haven't been able to get, and they seem to be wonderful people, but they're sort of low key. Very
low key, but like you say, I think they're quite big after hearing the things that they do. But you just don't see a lot of them. It's not like Barilla or a large national company that's in your face, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but you're very aware of them.
The point is, Rochester remains a sauce town.
Absolutely.
Now let me ask you, at the Nicosia house, a Sunday dinner, do you make sauce? Do you make your dad's recipe? Is there still, if only on the family table, a Nicosia spaghetti sauce?
It's very interesting because my mom just passed on here on December 14th, and one of the original partners, my Uncle Joe, also just passed on the 3rd of January. And that's kind of how all this got going with Dean, because we got talking
telling family stories.
Exactly, and there was a sign that had been in one of the old neighborhood stores for probably years, and my cousin Joe was on Craigslist and saw this Nicosia spaghetti sauce sign, immediately got on the phone, bought it, would have paid any price for it, and we all have images of it.
Excellent.
In fact, my nephew wants to make T-shirts out of it.
I was thinking I'd like a T-shirt with that on it. That'd be old time Rochester. But my question is, on your spaghetti up at the house, is it Nicosia spaghetti sauce?
I was getting there.
Okay.
We've been going through my mom's apartment and emptying it out. We found recipe books, and we found a little envelope that said Angelo's sauce recipes. Now the problem is that there's a variety of different recipes in there for different quantities, but to make it short, I think that the whole family makes a version of my dad's sauce. My wife actually makes the sauce. She got that recipe from my mom. I think my mom maybe made a few little changes from my dad's. So yeah, we are still making Nicosia spaghetti sauce. It is because it's our name anyway. If we make it, it's
it's yours. Absolutely.
But it's not the original recipe. But I think we are closing in on the original recipe. Made a joke with my wife the other day and said, you know what? We never had the opportunity to take the company over. Maybe we should start it all over again. But I don't think that's going to happen.
It'd be a lot of work. The health department's probably a little more persnickety these days than back then. But that, boutique-y kind of old-time, real, genuine stuff, I know a lot of people like that.
Absolutely.
I know I sure do.
This is all natural ingredients. As a matter of fact, my one uncle, and I was talking with another one of my cousins at the funeral, he said when my dad got involved at the very beginning, his biggest concern was that your dad wanted to use nothing but the best,
Sure stuff went into it.
And no chemicals and anything, and he thought it was just too expensive to make. But it obviously took off, and had things gone a different way, that might have been the Nicosia spaghetti sauce that had gone.
You'd be millionaires today, if only. Paul Nicosia, thank you so much for sharing your family story with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was an honor to be able to have the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Thank you. God bless you, sir. Nicosia spaghetti sauce. You'd have to have a few years on you to remember that, but it came out of that man's basement and out of that man's dad's ingenuity. I think Ledestri makes my sauce. Up at the house, if we have any, I don't have the first clue how to make it, but I'm pretty good at taking the jar or the lid off a Rochester produced jar. Back in half